Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, one of the key things we would like to bring up to the audience is something known as dementia, which is something that's related to Alzheimer's disease, which can cause brain damage associated with age, injury, or concussion. If you happen to know someone like that at present, we could encourage that there is probably no prescription medication to cure memory loss due to age or brain damage. However, there are natural approaches that support and repair memory by stimulating the repair and regeneration of lost or damaged tissue. Back on the program today is our guest, Dr. Sandra Bavacqua, who holds a Ph.D. in molecular and cellular biology. She has worked as a research scientist in both university and government settings, as well as lecturing to the public and to medical professionals around the world for more than 40 years. Today, we're going to talk about how the possibility of reversing dementia and early Alzheimer's disease naturally is something that might be right at our fingertips. Dr. Sandra Bavacqua, thank you for being on the program today.
I'm happy to be here, Daniel. Thank you.
Now, when you take a look at something like dementia and Alzheimer's disease, what I see more often, whether it's in print ads or whether it's on television or on the radio, is it seems there's a lot of answers about how we manage these things as they continue to deteriorate. What are we talking about here today?
Well, what we're discussing is the overall topic of dementia. And dementia is a word to describe really changes in the brain, sometimes severe changes in the brain that cause memory loss. Dementia can involve the loss of brain tissue, which can happen with aging or with traumatic brain injuries, such as like the concussions that athletes have. The loss of tissue and damage make it difficult for people to perform basic daily activities, and in many cases, dementia causes changes in one's behavior and personality, so it can be really devastating. I think of dementia as being one of the worst kinds of diagnoses a person can suffer, and it can affect 3 areas of the brain: language, memory, and decision-making. And there's 10 types of dementia that have been described. And the number one that is most people quake in their boots to think about is Alzheimer's disease. That is a type of dementia. It's a very specific type. But there's 9 other types, and Parkinson's, by the way, is one of them. But you have frontotemporal dementia and Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, and mixed dementia actually is a very, very common kind of dementia, and vascular dementia is very common as well. And so you can have a mixture of different kinds of dementia in one person and not be properly diagnosed. So there's a lot to the actual problem. Does that help?
It does, and it kind of makes me start wondering about things such as, for instance, one thing we've been seeing a lot in the last 10 years is the prevalence of head injuries or trauma to the head from people who play in professional sports, such as football players, as well as hockey players, things like that. And it kind of makes you wonder, as we think of dementia, is it Alzheimer's disease, is it Parkinson's disease, or as you seem to be indicating, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more components to it than just that.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? It doesn't matter if a person has had concussions or whether they have loss of brain tissue due to aging. The recovery is the same. The program is the same, and it works for all of those people. So recovering and repairing brain is the same whether you've lost brain function due to sports injuries or automobile accidents or whatever, people hurl their bodies about in different ways, or just the natural loss of brain tissue from aging. The recovery is the same for all of those. And one scientist that I will highlight here is Dr. Dale Bredesen. Dr. Bredesen should get a Nobel Prize for his work because he's the guy that actually found out that recovering brain tissue is the same for all of these populations. He's got facilities around the country where people can go and check themselves in, and it's pricey, but they do work. But what I've been doing is working with Dr. Bredesen and his And in what he's done, a lot of what he's recommending is doable at home. You don't have to go into a facility. And so sports enthusiasts and people that are elderly, people that are in early Alzheimer's, actually can do a lot to reverse their conditions, and it can be done at home now.
So just so we can clear the board with our listeners out there, we're talking about brain deterioration that causes dementia, correct?
Yes, okay. We're talking about damage or loss of brain tissue.
Okay.
And actually, in Dr. Bredesen's work, he's been doing before and after MRIs and showing that in 6 months' time, we can recover about 80% of lost or damaged tissue.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. And the reason I wanted to bring this up to be adamant about this, because again, when you take a look at marketing and advertising, Alzheimer's, they give you the impression, hey, once it's set in, it's done, okay, that your brain's never going to rebound, none of that. You just live with it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're also talking about trauma to the brain, whether it's, through the day when you get a concussion, whether it's a car crash or whether you're a professional athlete or whatever the case is, as you're saying, it's the same. Damage to the brain that way is the same, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now what we're talking about, moving that aside, it's all the same, but that's what we're saying here, that now it can be done naturally, and there's absolute proof, as you're saying, with one particular person's work, 80% recovery of what's been lost naturally.
Yes.
Now let's go ahead and talk about that specifically.
Well, I'm not sure what to say. There's been in the beginning, he did publications with only 8 single cases showing before and after MRIs. I have, not all of my clients have had exactly before and after MRIs, but we have measurements more in terms of behavior. In fact, I have an ex-senator that I've been working with, and he did have an MRI showing tremendous loss of brain tissue. He really had severe dementia. He could not find his own kitchen. He could not get dressed on his own. Driving was out of the question. Having a conversation was out of the question. In fact, he could speak, but if I asked him a question like, can you recall what you had for dinner? He'd say, honey, what did I have for dinner? His wife was always there, and she always asked his questions. Did you sleep well last night? He'd say, honey, did I sleep well last night? Every question, every bit of information that would be asked of him, he would ask her in exactly that way. 4 months into a dementia recovery program, he called me up on his own to apologize. And I said, sir, what are you apologizing for? He said, I had no idea how far gone I was. I am so sorry. I said, there's nothing to apologize for, but I'm glad to have the conversation with you. He said, it's like I've awoken from a fog. And he is now consulting. His wife says he's 100% recovered. He's driving. He's fully functioning. And she's ecstatic. He thinks he's not at 100%, but that's because occasionally he can't remember a name. But his wife claims that he knows more people than God, and he has no business remembering all those names. So I can say that we see from symptomatically. Now, he hasn't done his repeat MRI yet. We're waiting for that. But not everyone has physicians that will back them in doing that. Once they're asymptomatic, then it's hard to get that second backup MRI. But Dr. Bredesen's research, and he is a research scientist, he has the before and after MRIs on now quite a lot of patients. And we're seeing approximately 80% recovery in 6 months of lost or damaged brain tissue, and he's working with athletes as well.
Now, you talk about that people are able to do a lot of these things from home. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that people are capable of doing at home to help reverse this condition, or at least repair it.
Well, I'm going to start by talking about sleep. Most people cannot sleep like they used to when they were younger. And if I'm speaking directly to you, heads up, not getting enough sleep is devastating for the brain, because sleep is when your brain repairs. And all of us need to have brain repair happening. So if you don't get enough sleep, you won't repair your brain tissue, and you won't produce enough of the neurotransmitters your brain needs to function properly and to repair itself and to get into a deep sleep. So if you don't sleep, you don't produce the neurotransmitters that allow you to get into a deep sleep. And that ends up being a spiraling down, allowing for more and more age-related brain damage to happen. Acetylcholine is one of those neurotransmitters that is amazing for allowing us to sleep. And you won't have enough acetylcholine unless you get into the 6th to the 8th hour of sleep in 24 hours. So if you say you do fine with 5 hours of sleep, no, that's not true. That means that you're not producing acetylcholine, so when you're sleeping, you're not getting into that deep sleep, that restorative sleep that allows you to repair your brain. So brain repair has to be allowed to happen. So you can imagine, this is one of the big deals of the program, and there's 16 major steps of the program. Getting sleep and deep sleep is a big piece of it. And many people now go for sleep studies to see if they're not getting enough oxygen. If the oxygen is not being attended to, if you're not able to breathe properly while you're sleeping, and that is primarily done through nose breathing. If you're a nose breather while you're sleeping, then you're probably getting plenty of air. You're getting good oxygenation to your blood, and your brain is getting enough oxygen. But if you snore or are a mouth breather, then there's lots of different ways of getting out of that. It doesn't mean that you have to have a CPAP machine, but there are lots of ways of shifting how we breathe at night, and even force yourself to become a nose breather at night so that you can get proper oxygenation to the brain. It's absolutely essential. So these are the basics. And there's a lot more to it. There's nutrients. There's all kinds of different ways of attending to repairing brain tissue. But also, stimulation of the brain is very, very important. There's cell phone apps nowadays that can stimulate the brain and get you thinking. There's all kinds of games like Cognifit and Posit and the old-fashioned games like Scrabble, Jumble, crossword puzzles. These are all very helpful for stimulating the brain so that it continues to function properly. And social interaction is very, very helpful. We're very social beings, so we're meant to be around other people. So those social interactions are essential for proper brain integration and stimulation, so the brain continues to maintain its neuroplasticity. And not the TV nor the computer is ever going to do what a partner, a caretaker, or a friend can do for you.
I like what you're saying here, especially, when you talk about, let's just call it for lack of brain games, okay? Now, moving that aside, here's one that I would like to put out there, and I'm sure you'll really agree with this. My wife actually has this philosophy that about every 6 months, a person should attempt to learn a new skill. In other words, really stretch outside your comfort zone. Now, anybody can say, well, I'll give you an idea. I remember we came across this company some years ago that actually, for so much money per month, is actually a website company that is also pretty much an education on website development, not necessarily from the technical standpoint. You don't need to have that, like doing coding or anything like that. But, it shows you how to create a website for marketing so that it's a business, and I mean, it's really big. I mean, just all the stuff that they have on it. It literally is like a computer marketing 101 college class, literally online. Now, what was cool about it is I remember as I first began to do it, to learn these lessons, I could feel my head just, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this. You could really feel it physically. I'm serious. And anybody who starts a new skill. You can always see when they're learning something they've never done before, whether it could be like going to a restaurant, becoming a cook, for instance, in a place like a Denny's, because it's high volume, there's a lot going on there. You'll actually have that point where you say to yourself, man, I just don't know if I can do this.
Right.
And what was amazing is I had that experience again with this computer thing I was doing, and then all I remember thinking was, wait a minute, take a deep breath and take this one step at a time.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what they were saying is slow and sure wins the race. They say the tortoise, you can do this, and that's what they very encouraging. And as I did, and I said, I'm starting to get this now. Then I brought her in, and I said, okay, here's how this works. So then I began to teach her what I had learned, and I was learning it even faster. But the point is, as I'm saying, is when we're talking about these things we can do at home, is that I could feel the physical pressure of me learning something new. What do you think was going on there?
Well, you are creating pathways in your brain that didn't exist before. And it takes time for your brain to be able to do that. Learning actually literally causes physical changes in the brain. You're growing brain tissue to be able to do that. You are stimulating your brain. And, that's what I was saying, like social interactions or getting into, like, stretching your brain and getting new skills is fabulous. And not just like on the computer, you can get a new skill for a new sport. Playing pickleball or going and doing, some interactive game, playing card games and board games with people, something that you've never done before. And it may seem really complicated in the beginning, and your brain hurts where you're trying to get your head around what's going on, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're able to do it. That's your brain literally developing those pathways to understand it. Same thing for learning a new language. Those are new pathways, and that stimulation is part of how you repair brain tissue. But, I mentioned before a little bit about cell phones and, cell phone apps. There has been a little bit of research now showing that cell phones might have something to do with the onset of dementia. And I hate to even say that, but there are some chemicals that are used to make cell phones that are actually in your phone that have been associated with dementia. And there's also other common environmental toxins that have been associated with the onset of dementia. So cell phones can be a bit of a blessing and a curse, too, because it can keep us socially isolated. It can keep us, take up our time so we don't have the time to go pick up a new skill like you're doing. And yet it can give us a way of stimulating and learning new things as well.
So it also begs the question that we seem to put a lot of faith and energy and technology. And when you consider the cell phone, sometimes you might hear that technology is an evil that's causing this, but at the same time, technology is one of these things that are actually helping move us forward, especially perhaps in something like what we're talking about here today. And I suppose really it's more important to understand how the technology is really being used like a tool. I mean, if you're using a cell phone, and I see this all the time, you'd think people were born with these things in their hands nowadays. It blows my mind how often, let's say if you decide to ride a public bus, how many people are looking at their phones and not looking anywhere else. I don't even own one, and people seem to think I'm their hero. They're like, how do you go through life without one? It's like, how do you think you need to go through life thinking it's necessary? That sort of a thing. That's sort of my fun little challenge. But the thing is, it really is just that, though. It's how you use the tool.
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Good point. So I do want to get back to the whole concept of toxins, though, causing dementia, because there's a lot of research now that are showing us that, especially if those of us that are living in the northern hemisphere, we are getting exposed to toxins that can cause dementia. And one of the methods or one of the steps to getting well is either in a general kind of a way, allowing for the opening up of biochemical pathways to get the liver and kidneys to work a little bit better at getting rid of the things that they can get rid of. Sometimes skin and breathing, the lungs can be used, and some of the other organs can be used to detox the body as well. Actually, the skin is the biggest detox organ of the body, but the liver is the workhorse. And a lot of the chemicals that are being associated with dementia oftentimes are removed from the body by way of liver to bile to bowel movement. So having great bowel function and developing that so we're able to get rid of these toxins, and having great liver function is a part of one of the parts of how to repair the brain, taking away the chemicals that are getting in the way of proper brain function. So especially certain heavy metals and some of the environmental toxins such as gasoline additives, pesticides, herbicides, plasticizers are definitely associated with the onset of dementia. And everybody that I've tested, I can't find a person that doesn't have styrene, high levels of styrene. I think it's because we're eating hot food out of polystyrene, which is a really bad idea.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I know we're going to talk more about the idea of, of course, diet, nutrition, things like that. But, the other suggestion I like to make, too, is, when I go shopping, I always shop around the outside of the store where all the fresh food is. And if you ever notice, it's all the processed food is all there in the middle in boxes and cans and so forth. And it's funny when you go up to a cash register and you take a look at someone's cart, you take a look at them, you really know. I mean, I can see why and I'm not even a doctor, but I can see why your skin looks that way, why you're overweight, why you can maybe be a little cranky just by looking in your cart. And so when you talk about seeing this polystyrene, inside people's blood because of that thing, maybe it's going through fast food, that sort of thing. And although they're converting more to paper products now that they're storing, which is good. But, the fact is, how often are you going in that direction? And that's a lot of toxin itself. Even the processed food itself, I would think, has enough toxins to kind of make the liver think, oh, my goodness, man, I got to put myself in overdrive with this guy here.
And, this movement from polystyrene to the paper containers is a very, very good one, a very healthy change. And yet the petroleum industry still has a lot of styrene to get rid of because it's a byproduct of the petroleum industry. And so what they're doing right now is using styrene and it's been allowed to be called a natural flavor. Styrene, it turns out, is quite sweet. And it can be used as a sweetener in processed foods, especially those that are creamy, like puddings and any yogurts and this sort of a thing. It can be added as a natural flavor, and it's actually styrene. And it's allowed to happen, and it allows for the petroleum industry to get rid of their styrene. And this is one of the things that's been happening recently because the polystyrene is not being made as much as it was. So they have to get rid of it somehow.
And they're putting it in yogurt, you said?
Yeah, yogurts and puddings and anything that has a creamy texture or some certain sauces. It's slightly sweet.
Okay, now, since we're on that subject, I can't help myself because you're seeing this huge explosion of what's called the Beyond Meat burger.
Right.
So we decided, and we actually got a couple patties, came home, and I said, okay, yeah, I guess, if nobody told you, you probably might not know the difference between this and a regular burger patty. It's real slight. But we were on YouTube, and then it made us actually become curious because of what somebody was showing on this. They said, did you take a look at what this thing is made of? Sure, it's got beets in it, it's got these things, vegetarian. But look at all these other ingredients in here, and most of them you couldn't read, and you definitely didn't know what they were. So I took a look at the package that we had, and sure enough, I was like, are you people aware of how many weird ingredients are in these things just so you can have something that allegedly tastes like a ground beef burger patty? Really?
Exactly.
And it concerns me, that we are supposed to be moving in this direction of health. We got this Beyond Burger now. Well, it's beyond belief, the ingredients that I've seen in it.
And we've been moving in that direction because beef has been cut with texturized vegetable protein and other ingredients that have stretched the beef, so you're eating less beef and more other things. And actually, the soy that's used to make the texturized vegetable protein is processed in such a way that it really is not very good for your body. So even if you do well with soy, and not everybody does, but if you do well with soy, the way that they're processing it turns it into a food that is not really a great food. So when you're using soy that is like meat, it's not really a healthy food. It's causing chemical changes in your body that are associated with the onset of disease states and more inflammation in the body. So I am with you 100%. I do not believe in that kind of food. The food, I like to stick to a diet of foods that God would recognize, foods that my great-great-grandparents would recognize. Real foods in their native state, you can recognize them. They haven't been processed into anything. And unless they were just processed, like I will make breads and crackers with sprouted seeds or sprouted nuts. That's something that I do in my house, and they are wonderful flatbreads and very, very delicious, full of all kinds of fresh herbs from the garden, and that's a healthy food, and it gives me that crunch and a lot of nutrition and fiber that I need to keep this body that I got healthy. So I'm doing what I can, and that's a super high protein source. But they're made out of foods that are natural, that are whole foods that anybody would know the name of, right?
And I like that you brought that up because here's going back to technology real briefly. When I say technology can be, a bastion or a burden, it's either one of the two, depending on how you use it. YouTube has become marvelous in that arena. So when you're talking about this, making your own bread, sprouted seeds, one of the things my wife started doing more than a year ago, she says, when you go out and you're out and about on a day working or whatever, I'm going to go ahead and cook vegan at home. So she goes on YouTube, and there are a lot of wonderful people out there that show all that. I mean, they're into it, natural ingredients, the whole bit. But she says the one thing they lack is taste, so she made sure to take care of that. And she produces these wonderful meals. I mean, really, really fantastic tasting stuff. And the thing is, though, is although she knows how to cook, and although we've been together 17 years now, and she's finally cooking, after so many years, is the fact is that she's also learning a new skill, and they keep it pretty simple on YouTube. So if you're there at home and you want to get into doing all of what we're talking about here, there's no excuse. YouTube's got 1 billion instructors that show you how to do things pretty simply.
That's true.
And so now you're learning a skill, and now you're changing your diet all at the same time.
And getting into a diet like that is going to bring in more of the minerals and nutrients that allow for the chemicals that are stuck in your body to get out. And this is, going back to dementia, that is a very important part. In fact, some people, ask me, do I have to change my diet? Is that something that I need to do if I'm having memory issues? And the truth is that depends on what your diet is. But one of the biggest offenders, one of the biggest causes of dementia is sugar. Spiking blood sugar and spiking insulin is damaging to brain tissue. And sugar must be recognized, and is now truly being recognized, as an inflammatory molecule. It causes inflammation in the brain. In fact, Alzheimer's in the seminars that I go to is being considered type 3 diabetes. Alzheimer's is associated with sugar intake. And so decreasing blood sugar spiking in the body is really important. Now, how much sugar you can take in might depend on how active you are. If you become sedentary, spending a lot of time in front of a computer, or, just not able to move, or maybe nursing an injury, then want to take in simple carbohydrate foods, because it will actually lead to brain loss. And I know that that's a big statement that I just made, but Dr. Bredesen's protocol and my protocol also do include this, but it's going to vary from one person to the next. Getting to that natural diet that you and your lovely wife are doing now, that's one way to go. So for some people, it needs to be somewhat restrictive. And other people, if they're active and they're burning up that extra simple carbohydrate, then they can kind of get away with a little bit more of the simple carbohydrate. But eating a lot of sugary foods is really bad for the brain, and sometimes that's one of the big answers. So the brain cannot repair if it's getting pounded with sugar.
So now let's go ahead and explore that for a minute. Now, when you suggest, eliminating or certainly reducing sugar intake, the first thing people are going to think of is candy. Well, it's not like we all eat that much candy all the time. So what are other ways people are actually getting this sugar intake that they might not be aware of?
Bread, cookies, crackers, pancakes, pasta, food that has been overcooked, refried beans that have been cooked and cooked and cooked until they're creamy, that is a blood sugar high. And food that has been sweetened in other ways, actually artificial sweeteners, are stimulating the production of insulin as well. And how does that work?
High fructose corn syrup is another one too.
Yes,
okay.
Anything from corn.
Yeah.
Corn is inflammatory. And there's some work that's being done showing that GMO corn, there's research showing that it's a greater inflammatory response than to organic corn. That's an interesting thing. But however, organic corn is still inflammatory. In fact, all of the grains, when processed, are going to be a simple carbohydrate for the body. If you've broken it down, if it's in the form of a flour or a meal of some kind, those carbohydrates are more available for your body. It's going to give a blood sugar spike. But the artificial sweeteners are doing a similar kind of an effect because the insulin spiking is a part of the damage to the brain. So let's say you're about to take in a cup of coffee and you've got an artificial sweetener in it. There's no sugar in the coffee, but the artificial sweetener is there. Your brain anticipates the sweet before you even take the first sip, and your body will produce insulin in response to that. And so you end up getting an insulin spike anyway, as if you took in sugar, and you still have damage to the brain.
I like that you brought that up because it brings up something very unique, and that is when you talked about the association of the brain already on standby because it knows you're putting the sweetener in before you had your first sip.
Right.
That idea of anticipation of things. So you got to have to wonder about mental stress. For instance, that Monday morning blues everybody seems to experience. Things like that, how much might that contribute to the possibility of creating or increasing dementia?
What are you referring to, Monday morning?
The whole idea of, the brain anticipates, let's say, as you were talking about the coffee and the sugar, it already gets itself ready for that because it knows it's coming, okay? What I'm saying, too, is that in a person's lifestyle of daily thinking, for instance, the stress of going to work on a Monday morning, for instance, that sort of a thing. Those sort of thought stressors, would that also contribute to something like this as well?
Well, stress would contribute to that, and what some people do in response is take on a de-stress habit such as prayer, meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga. These practices bring peace, and so you're not stressed out because if you're laying in bed, I've known people to lay in bed on Sunday morning stressing out about the fact that they have to go to work on Monday.
That's the point. Yeah, that I was thinking earlier.
And that's like, what are you doing? You've got the entire day. If we're able to be present and in this moment, then we don't have to stress about the future. So stressing about, if you're thinking about the future or thinking about the past, then what you're doing is wasting this precious life. The only place this life can be lived and really experienced and appreciated is in this moment right now, where we are right in this moment. That's it. That's all we get.
Right.
And if you're elsewhere, then that's why people get to their deathbeds. I've heard it over and over. They get there and go, wow, I mean, like, life is gone. I can't believe it. And there's a whole bunch of things I didn't get done, and they have all these regrets. That's because they weren't present enough to actually live their life.
Now, I'd like to go back to the toxins somewhat briefly, specifically the liver. Now, what can we do to promote cleansing of the liver naturally? What would you suggest based on the research and the protocols that you've been involved with?
Well, depending on the diet and blood chemistry of a person, when I'm working with someone that is dealing with dementia, we do blood chemistry analysis. We take a look at where they're at as far as their nutrition goes. And there are particular foods and nutrients that are very, very helpful in repairing the brain. Now, if a person has plenty of that in their diet and their digestive system is working really well, and I know it's getting into their bloodstream, we're good to go. But for some people, they may change their diet or take in supplements to make sure that they have the antioxidants and minerals and resveratrol. Medium-chain triglycerides is another really big one for stimulating brain repair. You have to have the building blocks to be able to build the tissue. And this is important. The brain also is made of a lot of fat. There's a lot of very special essential oils, and depending on what diet a person has and their ability to absorb those nutrients, we make sure that they are receiving the right amount of nutrients to be able to repair the brain. And honestly, for some people, if we're early on, if it's a mild dementia, it can turn around so fast with just that approach, just a nutritional approach. And honestly, it's different for every person. The way that I work is I don't prescribe to just give people choices. And Daniel, if you and I were working together and I say, gee, you're missing this class of nutrition, would you like to do this or this? I might give you 6 or 7 different choices. And you might look at the list and say, there's no way I'm doing the first one. But the second choice, I can do that. And the third one, actually, I'm already doing some of that. So you've now chosen how you're going to broach that particular issue. And as long as those nutrients are making it into your bloodstream, you're good to go. And that repair will happen.
You know, I like, as you were talking about earlier, too, since we're on the subject of nutrition, you were talking about sprouted seeds. Now, I know there's a wonderful website out there that you can go to that has all these organic seeds. I mean, it's got a lot of really cool stuff on there. You know, when it comes to superfoods, things like that you can buy in bulk. And and I go to. And so there's that place, or even Amazon, you can buy seeds for sprouting there. And it's pretty fascinating because I was talking with a guy years ago. It was called The Kitchen Sink Farmer. And he produces these real small, simple books about how even in an apartment you could almost grow all the food you'll ever need naturally and organically. And
yeah, it doesn't take much space.
It really doesn't. And he was talking about something there about sprouted seeds. He says when you take a seed, by itself, it's actually pretty nutrient dense. By simply sprouting it, you just shot that density through the roof by, in some cases, as much as 2,000%. So when you're out there taking a processed vitamin, consider what we're talking about here. This is an organic seed with probably more than any multivitamin will probably be able to give you. It's inexpensive when you think about it because, I mean, I'll buy this big package of multi-seeds for like $30, but I mean, I've got enough to last me for quite a while, and they sprout within, a couple of days, and you're ready to go. Throw them in a smoothie, whatever the case is, but it's really amazing that could be good for pretty much anybody, right?
I am a big promoter of sprouting and bringing sprouting into households. Not everybody's willing to do it. And also, going back to the supplementation, there are some supplements that are synthetic and are very expensive and don't work very well. Sometimes absorption rates are very, very low, depending on the product that's chosen. But there are some really great products out there. And from my point of view, being the biochemist and molecular biologist that I am, it doesn't matter to me whether the nutrient just came in from a sprouted seed or some wonderful fresh food, or whether it came in from a well-produced food-based supplement, as long as the nutrient is in the bloodstream and it's getting the job done, I'm good to go. But I am very anti-synthetics. Synthetics just don't work well, and your cells can tell the difference. And there's awesome research to show that cells actually are more accepting of nutrients that come from food rather than nutrients that are synthesized in the laboratory. So that being said, when we have a goal, I had a very good friend of mine call me up and say, I have rapid onset of dementia. I'm in trouble. And her husband was on the line. They were panicked. And this is someone that I've shared a podium with. She's been a national speaker. She's brilliant. And I started questioning the two of them, like, what was going on when this first started? And they said, well, actually, it first started last summer, and we weren't even traveling. We were at home. I said, well, what were you doing? She said, well, actually, I was getting a lot of dental work done. I said, really? What, you were getting dental work? She said, yeah, I had some implants put in. I said, what are the implants made out of? She said, I don't know. I said, well, go ahead and do some heavy metal testing. We'll do some environmental toxin testing. And is it okay if I talk to your dentist? So her tests come back in, and her tungsten is through the ceiling.
Oh my
very,
goodness.
very high tungsten level. And I know that there is tungsten in drill bits, but the amount that was in her, she would have had to have been eating them for snacks.
Oh, my goodness.
It was
gracious.
a very high level, and I thought, so I called them up and I said, listen, is there any way do you make bullets at home? Like, how are you getting exposed to all the tungsten? Do you have like a munitions plant nearby your home? And they were like, no, we don't own any guns. We would never do that. We're not exposed to any of that. And they looked, there was nothing being produced in their area. And I was like, well, where are you getting this from? And so I spoke to the dentist and asked him about the implants. He said, well, I think they're titanium. And I said, well, is it possible that I could speak to the manufacturer? He said, yes, of course. So he gave me the information. I called the manufacturer, and it turned out that they had just started producing the titanium implants with tungsten cores. And actually, she did have irritation and a little bit of infection around the implants when they were put in. She reacted to them. And she became toxified by that tungsten. Now, tungsten is very, very difficult to get out of the body. And she did go into severe dementia as a result.
Wow.
So these are the sorts of things that can happen, and you have to be very attentive to how you care for your body and what you put in your body. So you're right. Putting poor quality supplements into the body is a really bad idea. And there's a lot of, in fact, I'm on a committee with the FDA. There's a particular supplement company that has carcinogens in their coatings of some of their capsules, and we're trying to shut them down. So there's a lot of that going on right now. So, yeah, interesting point.
Yeah, and like we said, keeping it natural is certainly the way to go. And, but as you said, any way you get kind of nutrients in the body is certainly, okay in your book as far as that goes. And so I'd kind of like to recap when it comes to dementia. It's a deterioration of the brain and the brain tissue. It is something that is reversible, as you were talking about one gentleman earlier, within 6 months. Kind of really turn things around pretty quickly, it sounds like. But in some cases, up to 80% plus, they can actually see a reversal in the symptoms. And this is across the board, whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, whether you were an athlete, whether it was an injury because of an accident. It doesn't really matter. It's all the same. So this is how the brain repairs itself. I just wanted to recap this. One of the big things you talk about is sleep, how much we really should be getting, because there's a particular level that creates what again?
Acetylcholine.
Right, okay.
And I'd like to say that in the program, we not only use sleep, but nutrients are used to synthesize your neurotransmitters, especially acetylcholine. And we also need to reduce inflammation in the brain, reduce cortisol production. We optimize adrenal, kidney, and liver function, and use some of the components are meant to provide synaptic structural components. So we're actually repairing brain tissue. And at the same time, we're supporting and optimizing mitochondrial function so the person has increased energy. They will feel more energized. And most importantly, we have to provide the nutrients necessary for increasing neuronal growth factor. And the more production of neuronal growth factor you have, the better the brain repairs. So all of these steps lead to cognitive enhancement and improved memory.
And as I was doing, I was kind of going down what we have talked about, sort of a recap, if you will. So we're at the sleep. And then the next thing you suggest is to certainly be sure that we're learning new skills, or we're active in things such as brain teasers, games, card games, and also social interaction as well.
Mm-hmm.
We talked quite a bit about that. And then the next step also that we want to consider is also taking a look at our diet. How are we eating? How do we reduce inflammation and cut out the things that aren't so good for us, as well as bring in things that are better to promote these kind of things as well. There was one thing, too, I know we talk a lot about, people say, well, exercise, but a simple thing is like walking, for instance.
Yeah.
When you were talking about this person laying in bed stressing on a Sunday, they got to go to work on Monday, and I thought, if they just went up and went for a walk around the neighborhood, they just watch that just fall away.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's pretty crazy how
really,
that works.
very true. So
now, how can people find out more about your work? And I know there is the Bredesen Dementia Facility. I think you were talking about his work a little bit there. So how can they find out more about all this?
What you can do is, I'd say the best way to start is to go to my website, drsandybavacqua.com, and that's DRSANDYBEVACQUA.com. And actually, you'll learn, if you want to, a little bit more about Beyond 50 Radio on the events page, and you'll also see a link for 7 Jewels for Recovering Short-Term Memory Loss, which talks a little bit more about what we're doing here. And you also have the option of contacting me if you think that you have dementia, or if you know someone that has dementia or early Alzheimer's. Now, if a person has advanced Alzheimer's, it's very unlikely that that will reverse. They have actual damage that is not reversible for the most part. But if someone is early Alzheimer's, or even in the middle of the mid-range symptoms, oftentimes a lot of good can come for that person. So consider that. Go to the website, take a look at the information, or contact me directly. And I would offer, if you say Beyond 50 Radio, I will offer a free 15-minute consultation. I do recommend that the person, if they have significant memory issues, that they bring along a family member or friend with them on the call. And let me see if I can't at least get you started. Okay?
Sounds good. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program, to know that there's, cutting-edge research and science going on out there that you don't usually hear about until years after the fact, and people, need solutions now. And, as I was mentioning earlier, it seems more and more what you see is, well, we've done research and it shows here's how we can manage a situation you're in. We're not going to improve it. It's not going to go away, and maybe in some cases it won't, but it never talks about how to improve or actually reverse it altogether. And so that's what we like to bring on the program, is that real possibility. What if we could reverse this? What if your life does improve instead of learning how to manage it, as it seems to go downhill beyond your control? And that's what we like to bring on the program, and you certainly help us to be able to do that.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's the intention. There's no reason for people to suffer in this way, to lose their personality, and it's devastating for the family to watch their loved one kind of fall away from them. It makes it difficult to get anything done when you have dementia. I think dementia is quite devastating. So I call out to all of you. There's some people that barely get into just a couple of steps of some of the things that I've talked about, and they can turn around quickly. And if you do call in and let me know what your particular symptoms are, I can direct you as to which things would be most important for you. I'm getting fairly good at this now. So, and there's no reason
that
why.
New skill we were talking about.
Yeah.
Becoming an expert. And that's the other thing is not only do you learn a new skill, but how committed are you toward mastery? And people, what's that? Well, mastery is a point where you have something that you do. The people watch you do it, and it's so easy. They think they can do it just as quickly and easily as you can. That's mastery right there, and that's a whole different level of things. So, yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, it really is. It really is, and it makes such a big difference to people to be able to get their lives back. Mm-hmm. So I've watched people, and the family members sometimes are just as grateful as the client themselves, and I'm very, very happy to do this kind of work. It's very gratifying. And also, I have to say, I've done some of these things for myself, and I feel like I'm back in the years when I got my PhD. My brain has sharpened, and I didn't have any dementia before, but I feel even sharper now.
I like it. See, there's a benefit even if you don't have it. Why not be sharper?
Yeah, exactly.
Be fluid. Have the mind of a child where you're creative again. So.
And that's exactly what's happened. I'm writing books, and I have more creativity happening as a result. And I've only just dabbled in this just a little bit. So it's been really fun for me.
Exciting. Well, Dr. Sandra Bavacqua, thank you for being on the Beyond 50 radio program. And for our listeners, go ahead and give out those websites again real quick.
Thank you. It is www.Dr. Sandy, Bavacqua, BEV as in Victor, ACQUA.com. And you're welcome to contact me by email or give a call and mention Beyond 50, and you will be gifted a consult with me, and we can talk about whatever it is that's going on. So, and Daniel, thank you so much. I really appreciate being interviewed by you, and I find you delightful.
Well, thank you so much. Well, it's exciting when you bring this new stuff on, and then you hear the conversations around, and you go, well, do you realize this is what's going on out there right now? And it's really exciting to be able to share that with people. And pretty soon they're taking notes. Pretty soon, they're contacting. There you go. Like, wow, I really followed up on that, and I couldn't believe it. Well, yeah. It's amazing when you're proactive in your own health and your own life, just kind of the things that are really actually out there instead of waiting until it's too late. So, again, I want to thank you for being on the program. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me, Daniel.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is Beyond 50. And remember, live your day past halfway.